The sun, a crimson disk, dipped slowly behind the jagged horizon, painting the dusty town of Deadwood in shades of crimson. The wind, the relentless master of this place, swept through the streets carrying tumbleweeds and the sharp scent of gunpowder, the bitter aroma of whiskey and the premonition of night. Deadwood was a place where the laws of civilization seemed a distant echo, and survival was dictated by the strength of a fist and lightning-fast reflexes. Young Sheriff Kane, clad in a flawless, though already dust-covered suit, surveyed the main street, swallowed by the deepening twilight. He had arrived here only 6 months ago, brimming with youthful enthusiasm and a naive belief in justice, certain he could bring order to this wild corner of the world. The sheriff's star, gleaming on his chest, now felt like an unbearable burden, and his gaze, weary from endless brawls, drunken rampages, and the indifference of the townsfolk. Deadwood had its own laws, its own kings. The Golden Eagle Saloon, from early morning until late at night, hospitably opened its doors to those who yearned to drink, gamble, and, often, kill. This shady establishment was owned by the sullen and perceptive Joe Black, a man whose gaze revealed not only keen intelligence, but also a deep understanding of the dark sides of life. Kane knew that Black, like many in this town, harbored secrets, and this knowledge stirred an unsettling disquiet within him. Every day, the sheriff struggled to maintain the illusion of order, but his efforts crashed against an insurmountable wall of lawlessness. The locals, hardened cowboys, reckless adventurers, and other suspicious characters seemed only to be waiting for the opportune moment to shatter this fragile peace. That evening, as on many others, Kane entered the smoke-filled saloon to personally assess the situation. His gaze, sweeping across the faces gathered there, suddenly froze, meeting Black's impenetrable, sullen stare. Black gave only a barely perceptible nod, greeting the sheriff, in whom, as he knew, young blood boiled. Kane knew that a new, bloody brawl could erupt at any moment, but he dared not show fear. His youth and inexperience were obvious, yet Kane stubbornly tried to appear confident, an experienced guardian of the law. Suddenly, a commotion erupted in the stuffy room. Someone laughed loudly, waving their arms as if trying to embrace the whole world. Kane turned and saw a tall man in a battered hat roughly shove a frail woman. She lost her balance and dropped the tray, spilling whiskey and beer across the dusty floor. The man, his eyes bright with drink, began hurling insults at the woman, demanding she leave the saloon. Kane couldn't stand by watching this outrage. He stepped forward, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. "Hey you!" he called out, his voice firm and resolute. "Stop it, right now!" The man he addressed froze for a moment, as if stunned by the unexpected interruption. Then his face twisted into a wild grimace, and he let out a loud, raspy laugh. "What, kid, you gonna teach me a lesson?" He chuckled, twisting his thick, cracked lips. "You're still wet behind the ears, young one." Kane felt his blood boil, flushing his face with anger. He was only 23 years old, but he had seen enough to understand that in this world, words often meant less than the willingness to fight back. He knew a fight was coming. Just as the burly man began to advance, Kane heard a quiet but firm voice. "Leave her alone, Harrison." Kane's gaze flashed towards the source of the voice. There, in the far corner of the saloon, at a table in the shadows, sat an old man with silver hair. His face was etched with deep wrinkles, but his eyes shone with calm and insight. The old man was dressed in simple, worn clothing, his presence seeming to dissolve into the dim light. But in his hand rested a slender wooden cane, which he casually placed on the table. Harrison froze for a moment, then his anger turned into a scornful smirk. "Well, old man, you're still here," he said. "Let's see what you're made of." Before Harrison could take a single step, the old man, like an experienced conductor, made a smooth, sweeping motion with his cane. The small stick seemed to draw an elegant arc in the air, and before Harrison could even understand what was happening, it was right in front of his face, lodged between his teeth. The next moment, Harrison collapsed to the floor, feeling a sharp pain in his nose, which was covered in blood. Blood trickled down his face, staining the floor a crimson red. Silence descended upon the saloon, heavy as a tomb. Kane, shaken by what he had witnessed, couldn't tear his eyes away from the old man. A chill ran down his spine, a premonition of danger. Within that seemingly simple old man resided an incredible, untamed power. The old man slowly straightened, his gaze locking onto Kane's. He nodded to the sheriff and leisurely exited the stuffy gloom of the saloon. Kane froze, as if struck by thunder, in the very heart of that smoke-filled establishment. He clearly understood that he had just witnessed something extraordinary, something that would forever remain etched in his memory. The following morning, Kane, consumed by curiosity, decided to find the enigmatic old man. He began questioning the townsfolk, but no one could tell him who this man was. Everyone just shrugged, spreading their hands wide. Finally, the sheriff, scratching his gray beard, mentioned that the old man lived on the outskirts of town, in a small, secluded cabin, far from the public eye. Kane immediately went there. The little house, built from roughly hewn logs, was modest but surprisingly well kept. The sheriff cautiously knocked on the door. The door creaked open, and the very old man Kane had seen yesterday appeared before him. "Hello," Kane began, approaching the door. "I am Sheriff Kane." The old man, who seemed the embodiment of serenity, nodded in greeting, inviting him inside. The door creaked open, and Kane stepped into the small house. Inside, an atmosphere of peace and simplicity held sway, immediately appealing. The air was filled with the aroma of strong coffee and freshly planed wood, as if the workshop had just been completed. "Come in, Sheriff," the old man said, gesturing him forward. "I am Silas." Kane sat down on a creaking wooden chair. Silence descended in the room, broken only by the ticking of the ancient clock on the wall. Both men studied each other for a moment, trying to gauge intentions. In the quiet, echoes of bygone years could be discerned. The lines on Silas's face resembled a map, etched with the roads of fate. "I saw you deal with Harrison." Kane finally broke the silence. His voice was even, but curiosity shone in his eyes. "You moved with remarkable speed and agility," Silas admitted, a hint of a smile touching the corners of his mouth. "There were times when I could hit a target more accurately than I can swing this walking stick now. But, as they say, years take their toll." Kane furrowed his broad brows, his gaze hardening. "I've heard the legends. They say you were one of the most accurate marksmen in the Wild West, but I don't understand why you'd hide away in this backwater, in this god-forsaken place." Silas sighed heavily, a shadow of sorrow passing over his face. "Everyone has a story, Sheriff. Mine is one best left forgotten." "You have nothing to fear if you're not breaking the law," Kane stated firmly, his hand brushing the holster that held his revolver. Silas chuckled, a flicker of mockery in his eyes. "The law, you say? In Deadwood? Sheriff, you must be joking." Kane remained silent, his face a mixture of weariness and the acknowledgement of a bitter truth. He knew perfectly well that in this cursed place, where gold and brutality reigned, the law was worth no more than the dust beneath their feet. The atmosphere of the saloon where they stood was thick with the smoke of cheap tobacco and the smell of whiskey. The dimness, seeping through the grimy windows, concealed the faces of many patrons, but Kane felt their eyes upon him. "I need your help," Kane said abruptly, breaking the silence. Silas, startled, raised his thick black eyebrows in surprise. "Help with what exactly?" he asked, his tone laced with doubt. "There's a gang in town," Kane began, his voice tense. "They're robbing banks, attacking innocent people, and terrorizing the whole city. I can't handle them alone." "And you think I can help you?" Silas questioned skeptically, lifting an eyebrow. His gaze betrayed his weariness. "I know you can do it," Kane stated with conviction. "You're the only one who can stop them." Silas remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the window. Through the glass, he seemed to be staring at something distant, a painful past. Kane watched him, noticing the subtle shifts in his expression. Doubt, fear, but also something else, barely perceptible. Perhaps a flicker of hope. "All right," Silas finally drawled after a pause. His voice, low and raspy, echoed in the dim light. "I'll help you, but on one condition." "How?" Kane stared intently at Silas's face, trying to decipher anything within it. In the dim light filtering through the dusty window, he could only make out harsh features framed by stiff strands of hair. "I will do this by my own rules, and you will not ask unnecessary questions about my past." Kane nodded, slowly and reluctantly. Doubts warred within him, but reason told him that this was not the time for pride. He needed Silas's help, desperately. The price of the matter didn't matter. He had come too far to his goal to retreat now. The thirst for vengeance consumed him, offering no respite, day or night. And so their partnership began, bound by a silent agreement and mutual distrust. Two strangers, united by a common goal, prepared to do whatever it took to achieve their desires. Silas, adopting the guise of a humble old man, became more than just a companion to Kane. He became a wise mentor. He shared with the sheriff the knowledge needed to survive in this harsh land, teaching him to shoot accurately, make instant decisions, and listen to his inner voice. Kane, in turn, tried to rekindle in Silas a long-faded belief in justice. He shared his aspirations with him, dreaming of transforming Deadwood for the better. Meanwhile, the gang terrorizing the town grew bolder. Their audacity increased with each passing day. They robbed shops, attacked peaceful citizens, and even dared to raid the bank while Kane and Silas were on assignment. Kane realized time was running out and that decisive action was needed before Deadwood was completely engulfed in chaos. Silas, watching the bandits, increasingly suspected they had an informant within the town itself, someone who warned them of the sheriff and his deputy's approach. One day, Kane and Silas received valuable information about where the bandits planned their next attack. It was a small farm where they intended to hide after another robbery. They decided to set an ambush. Night enveloped the land in impenetrable darkness as they crept towards the farm. Silas, as before, moved silently like a ghost gliding through the shadows. Kane followed, treacherous chills running down his spine. His heart beat anxiously, foreboding danger. He understood this might be their final raid. When they entered, a deafening gunfight erupted. The bandits were well armed and prepared, but Silas outmatched them in both speed and accuracy. He fired as if performing a dance of death, each shot a perfect hit. Kane tried to keep up, but his skills were inferior to Silas's mastery. He watched as the bandits fell, struck down by bullets, their blood staining the ground crimson. It seemed like only a few minutes had passed, or perhaps an hour, when everything fell silent. Only 12 bodies lay on the ground, scattered across the yard. Finally, the last bandits fell, defeated. Kane, wiping the sweat from his brow, approached Silas. "You are a legend, Silas," he breathed, the admiration in his voice undeniable. "You are simply incredible." Silas simply nodded in response, his face as impassive as a mask carved from stone. But at that moment, Kane's gaze fell upon a strange detail, one he had missed in the heat of the fight. One of the fallen bandits clutched a gold watch in his hand. Kane recognized the watch. It belonged to Joe Black, the owner of the saloon, located just a couple of blocks away. Kane's face changed instantly, an expression of confusion flickering in his eyes. He turned toward Silas, ready to ask the question that burned on his tongue. "Silas," Kane began, his voice controlled, "I have a question." "No, Sheriff," Silas interrupted, his face displaying an extreme reluctance to continue the conversation. Not now, but Kane could no longer hold back. The tension had to be released. "Did you know about Black?" he demanded sharply, his eyes flashing. "Did you know he's connected to this gang of bandits?" Silas frowned, his broad eyebrows drawing together to form a deep crease across his nose. He sighed heavily, as if making a difficult decision, as if a weight of responsibility pressed upon him. Exhaustion was evident in his gaze. "Yes," he finally rasped, his voice hollow, as though the words were difficult to utter. "Black is one of them." Kane felt the ground fall away beneath him. Disbelief constricted his throat. The man he had trusted implicitly was a traitor. Kane's face hardened, despair freezing in his eyes. "Why did you help me?" he rasped, his voice trembling. "If you knew everything from the beginning?" Silas replied calmly, his gaze unwavering. "I wanted the truth to be revealed to you. I hoped you would be able to make a choice." "What choice?" Kane asked, feeling a chill seep into the depths of his soul. "A choice between law and justice," Silas answered, the words echoing in Kane's empty mind. "A chasm lies between betrayal and truth." Kane was in a state of turmoil, like a cornered animal. He didn't know what to do. He knew a confrontation with Black was inevitable, but how to approach it, he had no answer. The next morning, Kane, summoning his courage, arranged to meet Black in a dusty saloon. The sheriff's soul was consumed by loneliness and the bitterness of betrayal. "I know everything, Black," Kane's voice rasped, but was firm. "I'm aware of your connection with the bandits." Black, standing opposite him, only smirked in response. "Well, Sheriff," he drawled, It seems your faith in people wasn't so strong after all, Kane noted with a barely perceptible smirk. I want to know why you did it, Kane demanded, his eyes flashing with anger. Money, Sheriff, Black replied indifferently, as if discussing the weather. Always just money. At that moment, the door creaked open and Silas entered the saloon. He paused at the entrance, his face, as always, remained impassive, as if carved from stone. The light from the hanging lamps danced across his cheeks, highlighting his sharp features. You need to leave, Kane, Silas said softly but firmly, his voice echoing in the tense silence of the saloon. No, Silas, Kane replied, his voice firm and resolute. This is my fight. I have to finish what I started. Black bared his teeth in a sneer. Do you think you can stop us? He challenged, his voice ringing with contempt. You and that old man? Kane and Silas exchanged glances, a shared resolve hardening their features. They knew a fight was unavoidable. The clash erupted swiftly, exploding into a furious battle. Black and his henchmen, like wild beasts, lunged at Kane and Silas. Kane, though less skilled than Silas, fought with desperation, defending himself and his mentor. Silas, a shadow from the past, moved with speed and relentless precision toward the danger. Every movement of his was honed to perfection, a dance of death. Each shot an inescapable sentence. In the midst of the brutal fight, as Kane selflessly covered Silas, his gaze caught the movement of one of the bandits amidst the chaos. That one, like a predatory beast, was creeping up from behind, intending to strike the old man. Without a moment's hesitation about his own safety, Kane, overcoming his instinct for self-preservation, rushed forward, pushing Silas aside, saving him from certain death. A shot rang out, and the bullet piercing the air found its mark, hitting Kane directly in the shoulder. Sharp, burning pain surged through him, and he collapsed to the ground, feeling the world around him rapidly lose its colors. Silas, who had been watching, seemed to turn to stone with fury. His eyes seemed to ignite with anger as he saw Kane fall. Immediately turning to the bandit whose eyes had recently gleamed with malicious joy, Silas leveled his weapon. One shot, and the bandit, struck down, fell silent forever, reduced to dust. Then Silas slowly turned towards Kane. He knelt beside Kane, his face etched with clear worry. How are you? He asked cautiously, trying to keep his voice as soft as possible. Kane groaned, a sharp pain shooting through his body. Yeah, he forced out through clenched teeth. Fine. Silas carefully helped Kane to his feet. Leaning on each other, they continued the fight, desperately battling against the remaining bandits. Blood filled their eyes, but they wouldn't surrender. When Black, the bandit leader, saw his entire gang wiped out, he tried to escape, fleeing towards the thick forest. But Silas reacted instantly, catching up to him. One precise shot, and Black fell, struck down. When everything was quiet, a heavy silence descended upon the saloon. Blood trickled down Kane's clothing as he leaned heavily on Silas, struggling to stay upright. Silas, without a word, expertly bandaged Kane's deep wound, his fingers skillfully tightening each knot. You saved me, Kane whispered, his voice breaking with exhaustion and pain. Silas nodded curtly, his eyes, as always, remained unreadable. You've changed, Kane. You've become a true sheriff. Kane, fighting through the pain, managed a weak smile. In that moment, he realized it was Silas who had helped him through this difficult journey. But sadness settled in his soul, like a shadow of past events. Silas might have been his ally, his mentor, but he had always remained a lone wolf, fleeing the ghosts of the past. So what do you intend to do now? Kane asked, catching his breath after the fight. Silas lifted his gaze to the ceiling, as if peering into it, trying to find an answer somewhere above. I think it's time for me to leave, he said, his voice sounding quiet and resigned. This is my curse, my fate. I can't settle down in one place. Kane nodded, understanding he could change nothing. I will remember you, Silas, he said softly. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on Silas's lips. And don't forget, Sheriff, that justice isn't always law. Sometimes you have to go against the rules to protect what truly matters. He turned, his tall boots thudding on the wooden floor, and headed for the exit. He paused at the massive oak door, his broad shoulders tensing slightly, and turned back. The bright light of the setting sun, streaming through the saloon windows, momentarily blinded him, illuminating dancing glimmers in the dust. And one more thing, Kane. Silas said quietly, his voice rough, as if he'd ridden hundreds of miles under the blazing sun. Learn to trust people. Not everyone, of course, but learn. Then Silas departed the saloon, leaving Kane alone. Kane watched him go. Within his chest, a strange melancholy began to swell. He felt he would never see that man again. He knew it with an inexplicable primal certainty, as if a premonition, deeply rooted in his soul, whispered it to him. Yet he also understood that his destiny had been forever altered because of that man. Only a few months had passed, but Deadwood was beginning to transform. Kane still held the position of sheriff, tirelessly maintaining order in the town. He refused to ignore the many problems, fully aware of their severity. Kane remembered all the lessons Silas had taught him, and he wasn't afraid to defy the system when circumstances demanded it. One evening, as twilight deepened outside, Kane sat in his office, lost in thought about recent events. Suddenly, a knock echoed on the door. Kane rose and, approaching the door, swung it open. A young woman stood on the threshold. She was unnaturally pale, and her eyes reflected both worry and confusion. "Sheriff Kane?" her voice cautiously inquired. "Yes, that's me," Kane responded, scrutinizing the stranger. "My name is Sarah," she introduced herself, her voice trembling. "I need your help," she said. Kane studied her face, searching for any detail that might give him a clue. In the depths of her eyes, fear and despair danced like two ominous flames. He felt a chill run down his spine. "What is it, Sarah?" he asked gently, trying to soothe her. Sarah took a deep breath and began to tell him about a gang that had appeared near Deadwood just a week ago. She spoke of brazen robberies and how people in the area lived in constant fear. They were robbing farms, sparing no one, and killing people, spreading terror throughout the district. Kane listened carefully to Sarah, feeling the familiar tension grip his shoulders. He knew he was facing another battle against lawlessness, against the corrosive rot that constantly threatened to break free. Looking into her eyes, brimming with fear and hope, he slowly spoke. "I will help you." His voice was firm, resolute, "But I need your help as well." Sarah nodded, her thin lips trembling. "I'm ready to do anything," she whispered softly. Kane smiled faintly, remembering the trials he had already endured. He knew a long and difficult road lay ahead, filled with dangers and hardships. But he was ready for it, ready to fight until the end, no matter what. He clearly remembered Silas's teachings, deeply imprinted in his memory. And now, more than ever, he knew he had to fight for justice, no matter the cost. His gaze drifted to Sarah, and a flicker of hope ignited within him, like a fragile ember in the utter darkness. Silas's words, spoken so long ago, echoed in his memory. Learn to trust people. The sunset bled across the sky in crimson hues, mirroring the colors of that evening when Kane had first met Silas a lifetime ago. He left the office, his footsteps echoing in the approaching twilight, and headed towards the stables where his faithful horses awaited him. A long journey lay ahead, fraught with uncertainty, but he was ready, guided by his belief in justice and the memory of the man who had changed his life.